I took my hearing just by but
Why don't you come sit up here?
Yeah, so me too. No, no.
You can come sit here.
Give feedback or approval is hearing better. We're recording.
It's kind of confusing when I have my earphones in, so I just hear all this. I hear Linda talking and then I hear her talking again like a second later.
So 40.
Sam is talking, but he's muted.
Yeah, in person microphones. Should I? If I unmute that, we're gonna get feedback.
Oh,
So the next time.
I can't hear Sam. I'm sorry, Sam.
Okay, so Sam was saying that we're gonna move forward with the parliamentarian. So John, if you want to just start because we can hear you.
Thanks, folks.
okay. I'm not sure if I'll try to share my screen. I'm not sure how that will change my let's see here. Okay, how is that working?
good.
So you can hear me okay? So go ahead. Okay, so if you've got questions, I'm not quite sure how. You'll just have to speak up because I'm not able to monitor the what's going on. Do you see my screen? Do you also see individual photos on the side? You do? Which is probably not necessary.
No, I only see your first screen, John. It's just like a slideshow. It's like the
Okay,
opening
but do you see
slideshow.
pictures of you on the side?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Mhm.
yeah, that's just depending on how we set up our laptop for the Zoom visual.
Okay.
I mean, we can close it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it may cut off part of the screen, but shall I go ahead then? Okay, here we go. This is a discussion during the movie It's a Bad, 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 Bad World. And they figured it 17 different ways, and each way they figured it, somebody didn't like the way they figured it. So it became every man for himself, and the rest of the movie was an entire race to find the buried money. Henry Robert developed Robert's Rules of Order to provide some uniformity in meetings because everybody had a different way of doing things. The main book is Robert's Rules of Order, with 816 pages for those who are brave enough to. It's not designed to be read from cover to cover. It's a reference book. Robert's Rules in brief can be read in an afternoon and contains 80% of what you need. It's written by the same authors and references the big book. So the presiding officer should probably have the big book. Everybody else should at least have the in brief book. Let me just explain what Robert's Rules is. It's not a set of formal rules to impede the business. It is not a set of dirty tricks to bully the group or get your own way. The purpose is to balance the rights of the members and to expedite the business. The balancing of rights, you've got the majority, and that's the primary rule, is that the majority rules. But a minority also has rights, and that, of course, includes a strong minority, which in your case is 4 out of 9, would be a strong minority that has rights. That individual members have rights, and absentees even have rights. This is why you have requirements for notice, why you can't change a quorum requirement when somebody was absent, this sort of thing. And then all of these groups together have individual rights. Just some fundamental principles. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because you've got the slides, I believe. And then I want to get to the juicy part about boards and debate. You only discuss one question at a time. So you deal with one item and then you dispose of that and move on to the next item. Debate may only be limited by a 2/3 vote. And in your case, that would be 6 out of 9 votes. So when you're debating a motion, unless 6 people want to stop talking, you just keep going. You've got your governing rules. In your case, it is your state law, your articles of incorporation, and your bylaws. And then you've got your parliamentary authority, which ranks below the bylaws. So your bylaws supersede Robert's Rules. And if you have other rules that you want to supersede Robert's Rules, you can adopt them as special rules of order. Suppose you wanted to have a rule that you'll only spend 10 minutes on a motion, on a main motion at your board meetings. You can adopt that by a 2/3 vote, and then that basically supersedes Robert's Rules and is under your bylaws. Just some basic definitions. The chair is the person presiding. A quorum is the minimum number required to do business. Main motion is a proposal to do something. Usually starts with I move that or I move to. The question is the motion that you're dealing with at the time. You might have a motion to paint the barn green, and someone might amend that to paint the barn red. Well, then the pending motion is changing green to red, and you deal with that motion. And then once that's resolved, then you get back to the main motion of painting the barn. A majority is more than half. It's not 51%, it's not 50% plus 1. There's often confusion on that. It's simply more than half, period. Nothing more, nothing less. A plurality is, it can mean more than one thing. It could mean more votes than any other if you have 3 or more alternatives, or some people use it, well, basically it means more votes than any other. A simple majority, sometimes people refer to a plurality as a simple majority, and sometimes they use the term to refer to a majority. So I recommend not using the term simple majority because there's not a uniform definition of the term. That's kind of a recurring theme in this, is don't use terms that have multiple meanings. A supermajority is simply something other than a majority, like a 2/3 vote or a 3/4 vote. Now, for a majority, it has to be more than half. Okay, so in your case with 9 votes, that would be 5. For a 2/3 vote, that means twice as many yes as no. It doesn't have to be more than 2/3. In other words, if something requires a 2/3 vote and it gets 6 out of 9, that is 2/3, so it's adopted. It doesn't have to be more than 2/3. Something is in order if it's proper or allowed at the time. Here's a key issue, germane. In other words, something has to be relevant to the pending question. If the question is painting the barn, then you don't talk about paving the parking lot, because that's not germane to the main topic. Dilatory. Dilatory is something that is intended to thwart or obstruct the will of the assembly. In other words, if somebody's getting picky about the rules, or arguing about small points, and it becomes obvious that the only intent is to slow down the meeting and cause problems, there are ways to deal with that if the majority doesn't like that action. Ex officio simply means by virtue of office. If somebody's an ex officio member of a committee, they're still a full voting member of the committee. Some people think ex officio means non-voting, and it's not. Common errors, failure to address remarks to the chair. In other words, when you start getting a back and forth conversation between 2 members, that disrupts the whole flow of the debate. Tabling a motion, don't use the word table as a verb, because it has different meanings for different people. Call for the question. Again, I said it takes 2/3 to close debate. So you can't have one person in the back of the room say, I call for the question, and that stops debate. One person can't stop debate. Also, the chair cannot close debate on his or her own initiative. I see cases where the chair says, well, it's almost lunchtime. Let's finish this. Let's stop debate on this motion and vote on it before lunch. The chair can make a suggestion, but it still takes 2/3 to close debate. The chair does not have the authority to do that. I so move is a poor practice because you don't have a clear motion. The secretary has to put in the minutes exactly what the motion was. So if you're having a discussion and someone says, I so move, and you vote to approve the motion, what is the wording that the secretary puts in the minutes? It should not be up to the secretary to decide that. The body has to decide what the wording is before they vote on it. You don't need a motion to approve the minutes. You either approve the minutes or you correct the minutes. So you would say, minutes have been distributed. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Hearing no corrections, the minutes are approved as distributed. Or if someone makes corrections, you would then say, minutes are approved as corrected. A motion is just a waste of time. I mean, if the motion to approve the minutes failed, what would you do? Well, you correct the minutes. Receiving and accepting reports. If you get a report from a committee, you don't want to vote to accept or receive the report because it's unclear whether that means you're agreeing to the report. If you vote to adopt a report, then you're agreeing with everything in the report and all of the recommendations. If receiving a report is on your agenda and you've approved the agenda, you have already agreed to receive the report, to hear it. So no further action is needed. Any questions on that? Okay. Friendly amendment, there's no such thing as a friendly amendment. An amendment can be worded. You can adjust the wording of amendment by common consent or by unanimous consent. In other words, if someone makes a motion and somebody immediately says, well, shouldn't that be worded this way? And the maker of the motion says, well, yeah. And then the chair clarifies the motion, the wording of the motion, and then it's open for debate. If someone makes a motion that is unclear or isn't necessarily properly worded, the chair has a responsibility to assist the maker of the motion. So the chair would ask, what is your intent? And the person would say what they want to accomplish with the motion. And then it would be the duty of the chair to give them the proper wording to accomplish their intent. This is even if the chair disagrees with the motion. The chair still has that obligation to assist the member in wording the motion. You don't need to establish a quorum. You got 7 people. Everybody knows, or 9 people. Your quorum is 5. It's kind of obvious to everybody whether or not you have a quorum. So you don't have to have the secretary announce that you have a quorum there. You don't start the meeting unless you've got a quorum. And so you assume there's a quorum unless somebody raises a question contrary. Counting a vote. It's not necessary to count a vote unless the chair wants to count it or unless there is a motion to count the vote. So it's best for the chair to simply say, the ayes have it, the motion is adopted, the noes have it, the motion is lost. Or there being 2/3 in the affirmative, the motion is adopted. It's not necessary for the chair to announce the vote count. If somebody disagrees with the chair's determination, they could ask for a division, which in essence would be a show of hands. And then that even doesn't have to be counted if it's obvious. Any questions on that? Okay, you don't need a motion to close debate or nominations. You don't need a motion to destroy the ballots. If the meeting's over, you don't need a motion to adjourn. The only time you need a motion to adjourn is if you're in the middle of something. If you've got a pending motion, then someone can move to adjourn. And if that's adopted, that ends the meeting altogether. I was working with one group where the quorum was a majority of the community members. They had to have a majority of the community members there to have a quorum for their meeting. And I said, don't you have trouble getting that? And they said, no, everybody gets paid $250 to attend. Well, the problem was everybody signed in to get their $250 for attending the meeting. And then as soon as somebody moved to adjourn, they were out of there. And they kept complaining because they never got through the agenda. Because they'd adjourned the meeting before they got through it. But if the meeting's over, if you've gone through the agenda, the meeting's over, the chair says, is there any further business? Hearing none, thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned. Okay. Any questions so far? Rules of debate. As I said, only one member speaks at a time. Addressing all remarks through the chair. Now, in an informal meeting, if there's only 9 of you and you get along with each other quite well, you can relax that rule. If things are contentious, then you'd better be a little more formal on that and address remarks to the chair. What you want to avoid is a back and forth between 2 members. So if someone speaks, then the chair calls on someone else to speak. And then the chair might want to alternate between those in favor and those against the motion. Also, a person cannot reserve the right to speak. In other words, the next person that gets to speak is the first person who seeks recognition after the current speaker has stopped speaking and yielded the floor. In other words, if someone is speaking, you should not seek recognition from the chair unless you want to interrupt the speaker to ask them a question or raise a point of order. If someone is speaking, you don't raise your hand until they are done. And when they are done, you may then raise your hand. Now, in a large meeting where you've got, I'm gonna say you've got a microphone in a convention hall, and there's 3 people lined up at the microphone, and someone moves to close debate, and the motion to close debate is adopted, the people waiting in the microphone have no rights. In other words, you can't reserve your right to speak in advance. Confine your remarks to the merits of the pending question. If someone is wandering off the topic, the chair should remind them to get back to the topic. Refraining from attacking a member or a member's motives. In other words, you can't say, well, you're in favor of this motion because. You cannot do that. You can talk about the merits of the motion. And you say, if this motion is adopted, it will benefit, a certain segment of the population. You can do that. But you can't say you're in favor of this because you want this advantage for your household or something, Does that make sense? You don't attack the other member or the member's motives. Avoid the use of members' names because you're addressing the chair. You're not talking back and forth. You're not arguing with each other. You're debating the pending motion. So your remarks are limited to the pending motion. Another very important thing is refrain from speaking adversely on a prior action not pending. In other words, if you're addressing one motion, don't bring up the motion that failed at the last meeting. That's not germane, and it would be out of order to bring that up. There's an interesting principle that I didn't include it in the slides, but the question is that when something is adopted by the majority, then the minority supports the action of the majority, or Robert said cheerfully, until they can get them to change their mind. So the only time you can speak against a prior action is if you are actually going to move to amend the previous action. So if you're talking about one item, you can't bring up something from a past meeting. that is not directly related. You can't speak against your own motion. You also cannot read without permission. If you have your own prepared remarks, you could read from that. But you can't read a newspaper article or something like that without permission from the assembly. Be seated when not speaking, that really doesn't apply in a small board. Refrain from disturbing the assembly. That's kind of a general rule. The chair does not participate in debate except in a committee or small board. So in your case, the chair can fully participate in debate. Now, I was parliamentarian for a board of directors for a foundation 2 days ago, and there are 9 members on the foundation board. And the board had a chairman of the board, and they also had a president. And the president used to be the chairman of the board a few years ago. So there was some conflict over who presides at the meeting, the president or the chairman of the board. Well, the chairman of the board presides because he's supposed to preside, impartially. But there was a controversial issue that came up at this foundation board meeting 2 days ago. And so the chairman of the board wanted to participate in debate, which he can without relinquishing the chair, but he wanted to take an active part in the debate and yet still wanted the debate to be fair and impartial. So he actually called upon me, the parliamentarian, to conduct that part of the meeting. So they went into executive session and I conducted the meeting during that executive session. And I made sure that people did not speak a third time while other people hadn't spoken the first time. So I was pretty strict in controlling the debate in order to be fair. Okay, any questions on debate? Okay, the motion. The motion is simply business brought up before the meeting. The motion process is a member seeks recognition from the chair. The chair recognizes the member. The member makes the motion and sits down. In other words, you don't make a big speech when you make a motion. You make the motion, then the motion is seconded, but you don't need seconds in a small board. Then the chair states the motion and opens debate. At that point, the maker of the motion can speak on the motion. And usually the maker of the motion would be the first person called on to speak. So the chair opens the debate by saying, is there a debate or are you ready for the question? And then you debate. Then the chair repeats the motion and puts it to a vote. It's important for the chair to repeat the motion before the vote. One of the biggest mistakes that chairs make is not repeating the motion before the vote. And not everybody has to know exactly what they're voting on. And then after the vote, then the chair announces the vote. Now, if the chair announces a vote count, then that vote count goes in the minutes. If the chair does not announce the vote count does not go in the minutes. In other words, it's not the job of the secretary to determine what the vote count was. It's whatever the chair announces. That's what goes in the minutes. And like I said before, if somebody disagrees with the chair's determination, they could ask for a division or a revote. Okay, I'm not going to cover this in great detail because I was only given an hour. But different motions have different ranks, so you can't make some motions while other motions are pending. In other words, if you've got a motion on the floor and someone moves to refer it to a committee, someone can't move to amend the motion. But if someone moves to amend the motion, you can then you can move to refer the whole thing to the committee. In which case it would go to the committee with the pending motion. So there's a certain rank, and some are debatable and some are not. The basic principle is you don't debate whether or not to debate. In other words, if you want to put limits on the debate, you can do that by a 2/3 vote. But you don't debate on whether or not to extend the limits. You don't debate on whether or not to debate. Okay, so I'm going to skip over all of these different motions. The role of the presiding officer. These are the three of my favorite movies. Mutiny on the Bounty, Mr. Roberts, and the Cane Mutiny. I live in a military community, so we have problems in our local organizations because these ex-military men don't understand the role of the presiding officer. They think the presiding officer is the guy in charge. Remember this balancing of rights that I talked about. The majority, the minority, individual members, absentees. Who's missing from this list? It's the presiding officer. Presiding officer has duties and responsibilities, but doesn't have rights and powers. The duty of the presiding officer is to facilitate the discussion and to assist the group to arrive at a majority decision while being fair and equitable for all the members. That's the responsibility of the presiding officer. The main thing is to maintain order and fairness. Usually, if the meeting doesn't go your way, you'll be satisfied as long as the meeting was fair and you were heard. It's when one segment of the population doesn't get heard, or they feel like they were cut off or railroaded. That's when you get ill feelings. But if the meeting is fair and everybody has a chance to speak, and the vote doesn't go the way you want, you just accept that, and maybe you can get the group to change their mind at a later meeting. Again, the chair's responsibility is to make sure everybody knows what's being debated and voted on. Repeat the wording of the motion. Make the effect of the motion apparent. In other words, you say, if this motion is adopted, it will read. And then you explain that. Make sure everybody knows what you're talking about and what you're voting on. And no more parliamentary procedure than the other members. The idea of outrunning the bear, you don't have to outrun the bear, you just have to outrun your buddy. So you don't have to know everything, you just have to know more than the rest of the group. Voting, do we need to talk about voting? There's different types of votes: unanimous consent, voice vote, showing of hands, counted vote, ballot vote, roll call vote. I don't know if you probably don't use ballot votes, secret ballots, because your constituents want to know how you voted. A unanimous consent is not a unanimous vote. Unanimous consent simply means that those in opposition don't choose to make an issue of it. In other words, if the chair says, if there's no objection, we'll take a 20-minute recess. Well, if I don't want a 20-minute recess, but I want a 15-minute recess, do I really want to make an issue out of it? Probably not. I've been at meetings where they debated for 20 minutes whether or not to take a 20-minute recess. Okay, so unanimous consent is simply saying, is there any objection to doing whatever? Hearing none, the motion is adopted. Or you can say if there's no objection, or the short form is without objection. Now, I hear that without objection in the Congress occasionally, and it sounds like railroading. If you're used to that terminology and your visitors are used to that terminology, that's okay. But I prefer the long form, which is there any objection to adoption of the agenda? Hearing no objection, the agenda is adopted. Now, when you're on a Zoom call and someone says, is there any objection? Don't say no objection. Because if you say no objection, then you'll be blocking out somebody who might have an objection. So if the chair asks, is there any objection? Keep your mouth shut unless you object. Make sense? Okay, a voice vote. All in favor say aye, those opposed say no. That's pretty simple. The problem is that no sounds louder than aye. So I prefer a show of hands. Also, with like on our school board meetings, I'll ask for a voice vote and a show of hands at the same time. Because people who are watching on Zoom can't necessarily tell how everybody's voting by the voice. But if people are raising their hand to vote, then the online audience has a better idea of who's voting how. So when I'm presiding, I'll just use both. Raise your hand and say aye, raise your hand and say no. Division in assembly, that's if you disagree with the announcement of the vote. So that again, the chair doesn't have to count it unless there's an actual vote to count. Counted vote is at the option of the chair. If a vote count is announced, that's recorded in the minutes. If the vote count is not announced, then it's not recorded in the minutes. Simply whether the motion adopted. A ballot vote, you probably won't be using that in your board meetings. Roll call vote. Roll call vote is recorded in the minutes. So the minutes show how everybody voted. And a signed ballot is similar to a roll call vote. The difference is that in a roll call vote, you can change your vote at the end. In other words, during a roll call vote, you can say pass. And then when everybody else has voted, then you get a chance to state your opinion. If you want to go with the flow or not. So in a roll call vote, you can wait to the end to vote, but if it's a signed ballot, you can't change your vote because it's already in writing. So these are the different forms of voting. Any question on that? Okay, point of order. A point of order stops the meeting. If someone raises a point of order, basically they're saying you're not following the rules. So when someone says point of order, the chair stops the meeting, says, what is your point of order? The person states their point of order, and the chair says, your point is well taken, and corrects the situation. Or the chair says, your point is not well taken. So that it requires a ruling of the chair on the point of order. Now, any two members can appeal. You can have an appeal and a second to the appeal, although, well, seconds aren't required in a small board. But if a point of order is appealed, then you go to the appeal process. So a majority can overturn any ruling of the chair. So the chair is not the captain of the ship where his word is law. Any ruling of the chair can be appealed, and a majority, which in your case would be 5, can overrule the chair. Okay, interesting point. A ruling of the chair may not be criticized without appealing it. So if the chair makes a ruling, as soon as somebody raises their voice, the chair stops and says, "Do you wish to appeal the decision of the chair?" And if they do, then you process it as an appeal. You debate it and vote on it. But you can't criticize the chair unless you appeal the ruling. Point of order has to be timely. It has to follow a ruling of the chair. You don't need recognition to raise a point of order. And the important thing is, it's the ruling that's being appealed, not the chair personally. And a majority would overturn a ruling of the chair. If there's a tie, the chair's decision is sustained. Okay. Let me quickly go over procedures for small boards. Let's see, a few minutes left here. Okay. If you've got about a dozen or less, then you follow separate rules. And they're different than the meeting that you would, the rules that you would use for your General Assembly. You raise a hand instead of standing. That's pretty straightforward. Motions do not need to be seconded. In a small board, you do not need seconds for motions. That saves time. There's no limit to the number of times a member can speak in a debatable question. This can be a problem. Except appeals follow the appeal rules, and you can have a motion to close or limit debate. Or so you can have a motion to limit debate, to set a time limit, or to say, you know, everybody can only, each member can only speak once, you know. But it requires, anything restricting debate requires a 2/3 vote, which in your case is 6 votes. Informal discussion is permitted when there's no motion pending. But you need to be careful about this, because an informal discussion with no motion can tend to wander. So the wise chair would, partway through that informal discussion, would say, could we have a motion to discuss? Because a motion will focus your discussion on the specific wording of the motion. Otherwise, you're just talking about the problem in general. If there's a motion on the floor, then you've got a proposed solution to the problem, and you can discuss that more precisely. Informal discussion can be initiated by the chair, which in effect enables the chairman to submit his own proposals without formally making a motion. So you can actually have a discussion and a vote on something without a motion even being made, as long as it's perfectly clear to everybody what's going on. For example, at the beginning of the meeting, you would have a motion to adopt the agenda. Well, you don't need somebody to move to adopt the agenda. The chair can say, the first item of business is the adoption of the agenda. Is there any discussion? You see what I mean? So you don't need a formal motion on that. Although the chairman does have the right to make motions if he or she wants to. When a proposal is perfectly clear to all present, a vote can be taken without a motion having been introduced. But again, this goes back to the principle that the chair has to make sure everybody understands what's going on and what's being voted on. You don't want somebody walking out of the meeting and say, now what did we vote on? What was that motion? That's a no-no, and that's the sign that the chair is slipping up. Now, this is interesting. It comes from rules on conventions. In other words, if the resolutions committee reports a bunch of resolutions, they don't have to be moved individually. So a motion is a formal proposal that you do something. So the point being, if you list the motion on your agenda, when you approve the agenda, you are agreeing to discuss those motions. So you really don't need someone to make the motion. You see the point? If it's on the agenda, then you've agreed to the agenda. The chair says next agenda item is 3.20, approval of contract 568. Is there any discussion? So the chair just assumes the motion to approve contract 568. And you move on from there. You don't have to go, you don't have to waste the time asking for someone to make the motion. Because when you adopted the agenda, you already agreed to discuss that item. Okay, vote can be taken initially by a show of hands. Sometimes that's easier than a voice vote. Chairman need not rise while putting a question to a vote. And the chair can speak in debate and vote on all questions in a small board. Okay, let's just talk a little. I think you use a consent agenda. I think you're probably using it correctly. From what I've seen, you're basically adopting a number of things, non-controversial items with one vote. And it's typically done without debate because they're non-controversial, they're routine items, such as, if you have to approve the payroll every month, something like that. The consent agenda just helps you with routine and non-controversial matters. And it's a principle of adopting more than one motion in gross. Division of a question is if you have a motion or a series of motions that relate to different things, you can split those up and have a separate debate and vote on each one. In other words, if you had a motion to raise the executive director's salary and provide a bonus, you can actually divide that into two motions if you want, because they would stand alone, and adopting one would not prohibit you from adopting the other. Okay, generally it takes one person to remove an item from the consent agenda. But if you have a problem of one person removing almost everything from the consent agenda at nearly every meeting, thus defeating the purpose of having a consent agenda, you might want to adopt a special rule that says it takes two people to remove something from the consent agenda. We have that on our school board, because we have one guy that doesn't believe in a consent agenda. He thinks we ought to debate everything. So he'd take everything off the consent agenda if he could. Any questions so far? Robert's Rules is basically the members' Bill of Rights. It's there to protect the members. Now, what you've got, and I noticed this at your organization meeting after the annual meeting, in that your board is divided 5-4. And that can create some real dysfunction if that is a ideological division. In other words, if you have one group of 5 continually disagreeing with another group of 4, because it takes a majority to adopt anything. And it also takes 2/3 to end debate. So if you can't agree to end debate, you could be there all night. It takes 6 people to end debate. but it only takes 5 to adjourn the meeting and go home, which leaves your agenda incomplete. There was another thing that I was asked to address, and that was public comment at your board meetings. Now, the way I'm on the South Kitsap School Board, in case you're not aware. The way we handle it is we have public comment at the beginning of the board meeting, and anybody in the community gets 3 minutes to speak about whatever they want. However, the board does not respond or engage in a conversation with the citizen at that time. Because the problem is you end up getting a back and forth debate between the citizen and the board. And very often, if the question is, well, what is the board going to do about, the speed bump at such and such a location? Well, the board can't answer that question because the board makes decisions by a majority vote. So if somebody says, what's the board going to do about the speed bump? You really should not be responding. You might individually have your own opinion on the matter, but you can't speak as a board unless you voted on it. The other problem that we have is occasionally in public comment, people will make erroneous or false statements, and that will often trigger a response from the board, which we try to avoid. In other words, we don't respond, we don't get into debate with the citizen at that time. We have a portion later in the meeting where each board member has an opportunity to discuss their interactions with the community, with their constituents. And if someone has made a public comment, maybe it's an email, maybe they ran into you at the grocery store or while you were out walking your dog or whatever, and you can bring those items up. And this is where, excuse me, I've got this thing in my throat. This is where the board can respond, where individual members of the board, speaking as individuals, can respond to comments that were made in the public comment portion. But by responding later in the meeting, you're avoiding that interaction with the citizen. Yeah, any questions on that? What are your feelings?
What do you do with a citizen circulating charges against a member's character? Can you call something like, Mr. President, I rise to a question of privilege, and then the president can ask him to keep quiet? How do you do that? Do you just have to sit and listen?
Okay. The board members are restricted from making personal attacks against each other, but the public in public comment is not restricted. In fact, if you were a municipality, which you almost are, the person has free speech rights. And so you don't want to stifle it, but some boards do have rules where you cannot attack a board member personally in public comment. Now you're technically not a public board, so you're not restricting free speech in that sense. So you could have a board rule that says public comment may not make personal attacks on board members. That public comment is to address issues only. Now you can adopt that rule. and then try to enforce it. But that would be better than trying to respond to the accusations. Responding to the accusations simply prolongs the contention. Was there another question?
Yes, if you're hearing something of a similar nature from another member, there is a phrase, Mr. President, I call the member to order. If the same thing, a member is sitting there saying things about your intention and all the other things that you listed in decorum and debate section.
Well, you would do, if a member of the board was doing that, was disparaging another board member, then you would raise a point of order and ask the chair to enforce the rules against personal attacks. So if a board member is being attacked by another board member, then you would immediately raise the point of order and ask the chair to enforce that rule. And if the chair did not enforce the rule, then you can appeal the decision of the chair. And then it would be up to a majority to rule whether or not the person was indeed out of order.
Thank you.
So that's one case where a majority can silence another member on an appeal of a point of order. Are there any other questions? Any questions on something I did not cover or did not cover fully enough? Okay, then I'm done. Thank you very much. I hope this has been helpful to you.
Thank you, John. Is this on? Hello?
Stop share.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, John. All right, so it's a little late today.
I'm just going to continue to listen to your board meeting as I finish driving home, just to see if you followed my advice or not.
Pressure. All right, so we will move to item number 3 on the agenda. That's the consent agenda. We have on the consent agenda approval of a number of minutes as shown on the agenda. Are there any objections to the consent agenda? Hearing no objections, the consent agenda is approved. All right, move on to item number 4, announcements. Does anyone have any announcements?
I have an announcement.
Okay, go ahead, John.
In the last Views, the last issue of the Views, there was a coloring contest for children. And I would encourage anyone who's listening and knows a child to suggest to them that they enter and then drop the entry off at the Welcome Center. And we will post them all in the rec center downstairs. And the winner will get a $25 Amazon gift certificate. Something fun for kids to do when they're.
I can't
cool.
hear what you're saying.
I'll try that again.
That's
Whoa. Much
Better.
There's a coloring contest in the last issue of the Views. If you know a child, encourage them to color or perhaps pretend to be a child. Color it yourself, drop it off at the Welcome Center and we'll post them all downstairs in the rec center.
Any other announcements? All right, go ahead, Joel. Can you hear me?
I'm just going to make a quick announcement about the property transfer fee program. So sure, probably many of you read the article that was in the Views publication, the December publications. So, so we had a pretty good response to this first round. We actually paid it out in two different batches, but it looks like between the November 30 mail out and the December 7 mail out, we paid out approximately well over 1,000 people, about 1,000 people or so. And, around 836,000 or so, like in those two. Now, what we've been doing is we've been pretty busy this past week. So we've kind of put together, we're trying to mop up like this last batch for people that didn't get a payment for whatever reason. Usually it was due to not turning in a title closing statement or an ID, especially if they had an address that didn't match. So actually, looks like we'll probably pay out another 70 people, and Epic is going to do another mail out these 70. So the people who have been in contact with me and who have sent me their closing statements, because we've been busy reaching out to people. So they'll do another mail out on December 21st. So those payments should show up in time for Christmas, fortunately. So, and that's about another 70 people, approximately another 65,000 or so be paid out by, or will go out in the mail on December 21st from Epic. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Joel. Any other announcements? All right, not seeing any, so we'll move on to number 5, which is property owner comments. That's the microphone.
Does this thing work? Hot mic. First time doing property owners comments, so I think I got 3 minutes. I had two topics I wanted to bring. My name is Mike V. I live in Gate 2 off of Grandview Lane. Sorry for the interference. So the first topic I wanted to bring up, I would like to propose a pump track in Sudden Valley. It's a small bike track it's suitable for all ages. Let me try to go back to my notes here. It's an inexpensive, low maintenance activity for all ages. Helps build community, and it gives kids and family cheap recreation opportunities. I've met with WMBC. They've offered to partner with us fully and also do a fundraiser for Sudden Valley to help bring this to the community. So my question is, how do I submit a formal proposal to the board of directors for review? And then my second comment is, I recently submitted or executed a survey for outdoor recreation in the community. It was unofficial. I'm sorry if that was not clear on the way that I promoted it, but I'd like to share that the results with the board of directors and just make sure you guys have access to those. And I'm just wondering what the best way to do that is.
Best way would probably just maybe send us an email at bod@suddenvalley.com.
Okay.
And I would probably recommend including Joanne as well at jjensen@suddenvalley.com.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Other, go ahead, name and address. And
My name is Ted Wong. That's spelled W-A-N-G, 17 Honeycomb Lane. I'd like to thank the president of the board for listening to this presentation, which is to urge you to support the reestablishment of the Emergency Preparedness Committee, also known as the Safety Committee, which ceased to exist a couple of years ago. Given the realities of Sudden Valley, which include, one, an environment with the characteristics of the urban forest interface combined with surrounding forests where wildland fire is a significant risk. Two, existing in an area where earthquakes are highly probable and may be of such magnitude to be considered catastrophic. Three, a significant distance from city-sized resources such as hospitals, law enforcement presence, multiple fire departments, et cetera, to the point where we have been advised that Sudden Valley, we may be on our own for several days following a major event. Four, there are extremely limited routes of evacuation. Two, for access, for evacuation or access by emergency equipment or personnel by road. And five, the current safety plan is over 10 years old and needs review and updating. I have to ask the board and the membership, who all have a stake in community safety, how comfortable you are with not having a committee to assess safety concerns and make recommendations to mitigate loss of life and property in the event of an emergency. There already is a group of Sudden Valley members who are willing to serve on a safety committee. They're willing to undertake review of the relevant documents, continue assessing the risks our community faces, enhance and build bridges to other agencies for resources for our knowledge and benefit, and to be an advisor to the board of directors. We have seen a previous charter for an emergency preparedness committee, but we would like to have input before said charter, if it's the pleasure of this board to renew a charter. We would wish to have input before said charter is voted upon, because we find some items in there that probably could use some tweaking. Just to start, I would point out that the requirement of having two members of the board, one of which designated as the chair, the group of us that have been meeting find this to be an unacceptable provision. The reason being that this gives the appearance that the board wishes to control the committee rather than allowing it to freely explore options and make recommendations. Advisory committees do best when given independence to do their tasks. In my own personal experience with advisory boards is that a single member of the board to provide context to and from the board is important and commonplace, but more than that is counterproductive. And if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And I only brought my talking copy, but I can email the board with the text of what I've just said. So thank you much for your attention.
thank you, sir. All right. There are no other community members here. So if a member in Zoom would like to speak, you need to click the raise hand feature.
I see no hands raised on Zoom.
Okay, we'll move on then. The next item on the agenda is the general manager's report. So I'll pass it to Joanne.
Thank you. The weeks following the AGM and November have been quite busy for the association. Our days have been filled with planning and holding two major events, de-icing and planning for snow removal, monitoring the weather, cleaning up after several windstorms, managing the transfer fee refund program, and getting ready for the year-end close. The holiday craft fair was attended by 46 vendors and more than 400 visitors. Parking was a bit of an issue, but with extra security on hand to direct people to alternate lots, we kept the traffic flowing. We made a note for next year to create signs that directed people to the lower golf parking lot, which would greatly increase the capacity of our parking. We also noted that connecting to the internet was very challenging for vendors this year. They needed to process transactions and had some challenges doing that. So I've taken steps to evaluate, and we will be upgrading our internet connectivity overall in the community center. This will not be an expensive undertaking. It's simply a matter of selecting a different wireless access device. So it's a win for everyone. Breakfast with Santa had a solid turnout. It was very rewarding for staff to welcome more than 70 children, their parents, and pets to the event. We had some dogs take pictures with Santa. It was kind of awesome. And we served breakfast in a heated tent outside the Welcome Center. We were blessed with clear weather for that event. Zigzag and Rags, which is a Sudden Valley business, sent Santa and Mrs. Claus to our event. And a professional photographer was on hand to take pictures. There are a lot of really cute pictures, and we hope to share some in the next edition of the Views. I wanted to address next snow plowing at the condominiums. The people in the community may be aware that SVCA has notified the condo associations that as of January 1st, we will no longer be plowing on condominium property. The reason for this change is that SVCA does not have the right to perform work on property that is not owned by the association, and our insurance will not cover us if we choose to do so. Similarly, the insurance of the third-party contractor who provided this service for SVCA, his insurance won't cover him unless he has a signed contract with the owner of the property where the work is being performed. SVCA has extended our contract with Baby Plow, as he is popularly known, to continue his work clearing the roads designated as UTV routes on the Sudden Valley areas through the end of this snow season. After that, as is required for all contracts with outside vendors, the association will reevaluate and put this contract out for bid. This was a discussion with Elite Landscaping, Baby Plow's owner, last winter. We've provided his contact information to the condo associations, and he is ready to contract with them directly for snow removal if they want to do that. The condo associations' property management companies were given notice of this change earlier in this year. Next, I'd like to call to the board's attention that there was an equipment accident. An accident occurred on December 2nd that severely damaged an important piece of our equipment that's used by maintenance and turf care. Specifically, while being repaired, the cab of our large excavator caught fire. Although staff were able to put out the fire quickly, significant damage was caused. An estimate for repair has been obtained and a claim is being submitted to our insurance company. A smaller implement called a boom crane has been purchased, which will help to tide us over until the excavator is repaired and back in service. As further information is available, I'll share that with this board. For my capital projects update, I'd like to share that all of the 2022 projects have been completed, either at or under budget. This is a very positive and highly unusual outcome. So I'm happy to note it today. Many thanks go to Tyler Andrews and our project management team at PNW. Current projects underway include the design and permitting phase of the work to re-side the community center, the place we're sitting now, Barn 8. Also to renovate the maintenance building and to install a boat launch dock. Work is moving forward on all three projects. The most time-consuming aspect of the boat launch is the application for the marina permit. And we know that that is well underway because the community comment portion of that permit application has been out in the field, and we hope to obtain that permit soon. So that's an important milestone for that important project. The remainder of my GM report includes updates from each of the active departments, and I'll post that to the website and provide it to the board following this meeting. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Joanne. We'll move on to item number 7 on the agenda, is the financial reports. So I'll pass it over to Joel.
Normally, of course, like how it would go would be I would I would, like at this time of the month in December, I would be doing the October statements to the finance committee, which would normally be next week. So it's just kind of this holiday season where we're doing one board meeting a month that is throwing things a little kind of out of sync. So I'll be doing the September statements today. And then what's the next board meeting? January?
Yeah, second, third.
Yeah. So then by that time, then we'll do October at that time. And then after that, everything will start to return back to normal again in terms of the frequency of the reports. So I'll go ahead and cover the September statements, and everyone has the statements in your agendas. Also followed by, so once a quarter, we also put out the capital project report, which just shows every single capital project that the board has approved. And, the state of the expenditures, the spending on those projects as of the end of the quarter, which in this case matches the financial statements 9/30/22. So I'll start off with financial statements. I would say I always start with the balance sheet. There's really nothing huge to go over with the balance sheet. It's fairly static from the month before. Probably the biggest change would be transferring about $500,000 out of operating cash down into to help pay for that for the Welcome Center. So that came down into SERP, and that was part of the purchase amount for the Welcome Center. And of course, you'll see that down in the member equity section, the 500,000 going out of operations and then back into capital again. And also, you'll see in the long-term liabilities, you'll see the SERF loan, that original 2018 SERF loan. Of course, it used to just be called the SERF loan, but I call this the 2018 SERF loan since that's the one that we paid off. That was a part of that. Part of the new loan, the 2022 SERF loan, which refinanced the 2018 SERF loan at a lower rate. So, that, and then you'll see 2.1 million at the end of September 30, 2022. So that assumes that 2018 SERF loan, and then also approximately about $1 million that was used in conjunction with 500,000 for the purchase of the Welcome Center. So the next page, turning to the income statement. Of course, this is probably the most interesting page, out of all these financial statements. This is where you'll see the current expenditures, revenues of the association. And obviously, we're covering September. So the first three columns is the month to date. And at this point of the year, especially since we're so deep into the year, we'll focus on the year to date. So then the last three columns covers year to date. So January through September financial statements. Now you'll see. Should I pull this up? Oh, that's fine. But anyways, you all have the financial statement. So you'll see basically. Okay, so if you look at the fifth column, so the operations better worse column, you'll see to the right of that, you'll see collection rate, 97.2% collection rate through the end of September. So we budgeted for a 93% collection rate for 2022. So at the end of the year, we wanted to have 93% collection rate. That's what all the expenses kind of revolve around that. So for every percent over that budgeted collection rate, that's, we're to the good revenues wise. And then, of course, I said these numbers before, but I'll say it again. So for operations, for every 1% over that 93% collection rate, then operations takes in about another 21,695 in revenues, and capital takes in another 27,766. So that you could expect that much more for each percent over the collection rate, that more than what we budgeted for. And that, of course, that's true for any year prior to this, whenever the association was over the budgeted collection rate. So total revenues about 3.342 million. Total expenditures and I'm just saying year to date, 3.1 million. So of course now in September, this is where it's just a little bit interesting because it's going to be a little more difficult to compare apples to apples, because last year at the end of September 30, 2021, we had that PPP loan forgiveness, and that was 357,700. So that showed up in the revenue section. So I'll just tell you what the numbers in 2021. So we have 200. So in 2022 we have 240,305 in net operating income. So at the end of 2021 September we had 793,591. Of course, $357,700 of that was that PPP loan forgiveness, which is it's a one-off basically. That doesn't happen every year. Maybe it'll never happen again. So if I were to just kind of translate that number, if I were to, that 793,000 that I just said, if I just kind of strip out that PPP loan, then you would be looking at kind of a little more comparable 436,000 at the end of September 2021 versus 240,305 at the end of 2022. But then it gets just a little more complicated and interesting because at the end of September 2022, September we had 3 payrolls. So last year in 2021, September had 2 payrolls, and then that third payroll wound up in October 2021. So when we get to the end of October year to date, then the financial statements year to date will start to become more comparative, but that payroll was responsible for about an extra $74,000 worth of expenses in September. So meaning if I just even adjusted that away to try to make it more comparable, then we're within about 122,000 of where we were last year at this time. Meaning if I adjust away the PPP loan, take into account that third payroll. So now, of course, I do talk about the expense to revenue ratio or revenue to expense ratio. Basically, all this is I'm looking at our expenses in terms of revenues, and it's just basically telling you for every dollar of revenues, how much do we have in expenses without adjusting anything whatsoever. At the end of September, it was 92.8%. So that just means for every dollar of revenue we had 92.8 cents of expenses. Now, at the end of August 2022, last month, it was 89.1%. But if I adjust out that third payroll, since that's hard to compare it year over year, if I took that into account, then our expense to revenue ratio would actually be about 90.6%. So we're fairly close to where we were at the end of August 2022. Now, at the end of September 2021, it was 78.3%. Of course, that looks fantastic. That means only $1 revenues, 78.3 cents of expenses for every dollar of revenues. But that's including that PPP loan. If I adjusted all of that stuff away again, then it would have been about around 87% adjusted revenue to expense ratio. So we're fairly close in terms of like year over year when you start to take into account like the PPP loan, the extra payroll that we had in September. Now, since we had the extra payroll of October 2021, and once we get year to date next month, for those financial statements, then they'll be very comparable. Now, and I will point out too, since I talked about the collection rate, so we were at 97.2% collection rate at the end of September. So at the end of September of 2020, we were year to date 94.5%. Or excuse me, let me skip ahead to 2021. Okay. So at the end of September 2021, we were at 95.6%. So we're at 97.2%. So our collection rate is doing better than it was last year. Now I've already looked ahead at October's collection rate because I can calculate those numbers already, which I have. So year to date at the end of October, it actually ticked up to 97.5% from 97.2%. And then at the end of November, it actually ticked up a little more to 97.6%. So that's really great in terms of the membership, in terms of the amount of dues that we're billing versus collecting. That's a really good collection rate. Now, if you turn to the next page, you're looking at the reserve cash balance. Of course, like I've said, this is a tremendously helpful sheet. It's probably more helpful than what it looks like at first. It's, just looks like numbers like everything else. But basically, this sheet is taking into account, takes into account obviously all the collections that we've taken in for the year, the projected collections based off of the collection rate, even just at 93%. What we expect to take in for the rest of the year. And then probably the one line, the obligated expense holdings, looks like it's like the first kind of line above the third set of bold lines from the bottom, where you see net usable cash balance 12/31/2022. The line above that is the obligated expenses, and these amounts will track right with this capital project report that's included in your packet. So like if we look at SURF right here, you'll see through September, every single Well, it's the first page that follows the financial statements. But this has every single capital project code on here that the board has approved through September. And it gives you the status, in terms of the board approved budgeted amount, then column B, this with the blue kind of heading, total invoice. That shows you all the invoices that have come in. And the last column is the funds obligated. So it's just meaning how much more are we on the hook for if we just assume we're going to spend this budget out. And then, so for SURF, you'll see we still have $495,026 obligated. And then that's the amount that you'll see on your reserve cash balance report under the first SURF column, $495,026. And it's the same thing that repeats for the roads, the column right next to that. And then the mailbox column, of course, we don't have any approved projects for mailboxes, but UDR, the last page of that capital report, for the UDR column, same thing, the approved UDR expenditures. And actually, we'll come back to this column when we get to the tree thing too as well, because so basically the net usable cash at 12/31/2022 for SURF, the first column, after all of this is taken into effect, and we expect to have about $3,082,259 at the end of 2022. For roads, about 1.96 million. We'll just skip over to UDR, basically the second to the last column, 184,208. And then you'll notice for SURF and roads, especially, there's this board recommended carryover balance for SURF at 600,000, for roads it's 500,000. And that's just basically, that's the amount that the board would not like to fall below. So it's kind of like, they'll just assume that that can't be spent. So that gives you a net usable cash balance at the end for SURF of about 2.5 million, 2,482,259 million. For roads, 1.46 million. For UDR, this doesn't have obviously a board recommended carryover balance for UDR, so that's 184,000. If you turn the page, actually, so the next page, actually, this page that you're looking at, this is basically the same thing as looking at the income statement, but it's just broken out now by department. You can see which department is responsible for what, for the operating net income, and UDR is on here as well. But this page that we're looking at is for the current month. This is only for September. And like I said, at this point in the year, it's more helpful just to go ahead and skip over this. We'll look at the year to date. So the next page is it's the exact same presentation, but now we're looking at it year to date, January 1 through September 30, 2022. And so this is the operating net income, which matches exactly that second page of the income statement, but it just shows you what departments responsible for what, basically, in terms of better, worse, and whatever. The golf line item, this is the line items that I talked about the most. It's obviously brings in the most revenue for us out of any department. And so basically it's about the 7th row down. You'll see golf just right above Marina. And so the actual revenue for golf, 1,099,663. Last year at the end of September 2021 year to date, golf was 1,040,786. So golf is actually better by almost $59,000 revenue wise year over year. And then the actual salary benefits column, actual other expenses column, those two together make up the expenses. So basically 3rd column, 5th column from the left gives you the total expenses for golf, in this case, 762,933. Last year they had 727,538. So their expenses are higher, but we would expect that, especially with the union and stuff like that, the additional union costs. So it's higher by about 35,000. So then the second from the right column, the net income, golf had 336,730. Now last year they had 313,248 at this time, at the end of September. So they're better net income wise by 23,500, real close to that. So golf is doing really well. Golf is doing better than how they did last year, and last year was their best year ever. So golf is doing really well revenue wise. And in terms of the far right column, the net better worse column, you can see how each department did. Obviously if it has these brackets, that means they're worse than budget. It's like you have like ACC security Worsened budget 53,154. I can tell you that's heavily related to trees. Of course, we'll get to trees at the end of this whole agenda. And then third row down, administration 62,181 worsened budget, and that's largely due to like other basically temp labor services, other professional services, which is more expensive than obviously, like just hiring someone. Then the row below that, common cost 76,673 negative, largely related to legal expenditures. And then the maintenance column 44,419 worsened budget, that's heavily related to snow weather response. So I would say those are pretty much the main highlights of the financial statements. If anyone had any questions about these or about like capital budgeting, sure.
Okay, starting on page 1 of 6, I just have a question.
Is that the balance sheet?
Yes, on the long-term surf loan, have we not made any payments on any of that between, it doesn't show that the balance has changed at all. Have we made any payments
Oh, I think,
towards surf?
I think what you're getting at, like you're talking about the 2022, right, surf loan?
Yeah, and there's no change and they've been combined and it's like there's been no payment.
Yeah, the reason this becomes kind of I guess you could call it a optical illusion in a sense, because at the end of 2021, we had no balance for this. So the increase decrease from December 2021 to September 30, 2022, like next month, this will go down again because of the payment, but then the increase decrease will continue to match, since it was a zero balance at the beginning of the year. So that's just.
So we have been making
Oh, yeah,
payments.
absolutely.
That's what I thought I understood. That's why I was asking that question.
But this one, literally, it's just the fact that it had a zero balance at the beginning of the year. That's what causes those two columns to, it'll continue to look the same even when the balances go down.
Okay.
Next year, that will be different. Then you'll be able to see.
All righty. Just a question that I wanted to know.
Yeah.
Then I have a question on page 3 of 6. And it's the 2022 expenditures where it says 2,084,427.
Yeah.
So does that include,
The Welcome Center purchase?
yes,
Yes, that's in.
because I was looking at that going, wait a minute, I'm looking at this,
Yeah.
this report and I don't, it's just down there kind of all by itself.
And that's actually a good kind of line to point out to what Linda was talking about, that 2022 expenditures row. So, over 2 million for surf, over $1 million for roads. Basically, that includes all the cash that went out the door on capital expenditures.
On big expense, yeah, and most of the time those match up with these capital reports, and it's just with the 1850 all by itself, down at the bottom of the page, you don't get matching
Right.
numbers.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, my last question, and then I'm done, is on page 5 of 6. We have the marina, and since July of 2022, the amount of salary benefits has been 19,499 and hasn't changed one iota. It's just been a blank line every month. But the salary and benefits changes all the time. And I don't understand if there's been no change in that since July of that accumulated 19,499, why it keeps changing every month.
You're talking about the 19,499.
That stays the same. There are months when there has been not even though we've had employees down there all summer long, there's been no salaries posted to it. And yet the benefits and the better or worse keeps changing. And I'm just curious if we've had people down there in the marina.
No, what is it? What number keeps changing? Oh, yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. So basically, you're right in terms of the 19,499. So
that hasn't changed since July.
Yeah, like we don't have anyone being billed to the marina at this point. But what's worked into the budget is the fact that at the beginning of the year, how it was budgeted was that we would have expenses going on with the marina. But now since the actual salary benefits amount isn't going up, then the salary benefits would be expected to continue to go up to be better each month, since we don't have someone, since we don't have a salary expense going there.
It's just strange to see that changing and the other one is, so where are the salaries being?
That's just a component of the budgeting module.
If we had people down there scheduled at least one person every day from like, what, 10 till 6 in the evening?
Uh-huh.
Where's the salary
So that'll
coming
be-
from?
That'll be in recreation. Is where that's.
But that's a special assessment and there was no provision for anybody working in the marina in that special assessment. That was only for parks and rec and not the marina. So can you really do that? I understand in the half of the year coming up where you'll go out of it, you could do that. But for up until May, you have no salaries whatsoever being charged to the marina. And there's nothing in that special assessment for people to be paid out of the rec fund.
That's a recreation special assessment. It also has a provision in there that it's up to the board's discretion of how those funds are utilized. So
I'll go look. I'll go take a look.
Yeah,
That seems like taking away a lot of money from that special assessment.
We added staff that are used for several different things. It didn't take any money away, as a matter of fact. It's a lot more efficient to run it that way.
Say, I don't remember reading it, but I'll go back and look at the measure. Thank you.
Time.
Yeah, I just had a question on page 2 of 6, and I'm just wondering why under expenses contracted and professional services is 224,263 worse than budget.
Yeah, I can tell you, I can tell you like elements that make up, and by the way, too, I know, but you don't have the full statements actually in your board packet, but if you also ever wanted to kind of drill down more into any of these line items, like what Timmy pointed out, contract and professional services, for example, like she said, 359,709, and then she pointed out it's 224,263 worse than budget. On the website, if you go onto the finance committee website where you can see the full financial statements, you can actually, so this line item is contract professional services. So you can actually turn to the page right after the, like those departmental statements. They'll actually show you. It'll actually show you each one of those groupings, like those subgroupings, and you'll actually see all the different line items that go under the subgrouping. So like what Time you pointed out, so the big line items would be other professional services. So it's worse than budget by about 132,000. And that's going to be, well, I can tell you, this can be like GL 7095. That'll be like temporary labor, billings from Express, Kelly services, stuff like that. And then you'll also see pool management. So that's another almost 41,000 for that with pool management in terms of being responsible for that. And those, and as well, like ACC consultant, another 16,000 worse than budget. So those are like the main items that make up that lion's share of that.
I guess my other question would be, we are not using funds under salaries and benefits. It seems rather than getting our own employees, we're contracting out. Is that going to change?
Oh, yeah. And like it's, yeah. I mean, because we, like Joanne, right? Like she talked about the admin 2 services division was higher. Yes, you're right. In terms of like having our own employees always is more financially prudent than paying for temporary labor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing too, like whenever you see like other professional services, like a deficit like that, 132,000, then you can probably likewise always see where something is under budget in terms of salary and benefits in this case, which is it's under budget by 160,000 as well. So those two kind of balance each other out.
So can I point out something? So when you look at, when you're actually comparing it with so there's 2 different things here. He's pointing out like the temp services, right? But then there's also, when you're talking about maintenance, though you'll see like a decrease on the CVC and that type of thing on those expenses, because what we found is that there are certain efficiencies, again, that make better sense for us to contract them out. And it actually saves us money. Like this year, we've twice had the street swept with the vacuum sweepers. And so that's normally an expense that we utilize our own staff, but we don't have the proper equipment for that, right? Like our sweeper just stirs it up, flings it around and throws it in the culverts and then creates more debris and blockage. So what we found is by spending at 30,000, like 15,000 twice a year, and contract another service that can come in quickly in 2 weeks' time, we've got cleaner streets, our culverts are cleaner, and our regular maintenance staff can just focus on their, their jobs that they have. So it's just an efficiency. So it is a balance. Like when you look at those numbers, and if we need to, we can spend more time on that. Maybe like once the finance committee's going and stuff, maybe we can drill down on how that works. But you'll see that we're actually ahead when you're looking at those numbers.
Yeah, I guess I should point out too, that not everything in that line item, that other professional services will just be temporary labor. Like we could also have some contract type work as well that could be put in there as well. If there's not a definitive place to put it, counting.
Any other questions for Joel?
Yeah,
You?
it's kind of a general
Make sure
concept.
you're talking to the mic.
Anything? Oh, sorry. Is that better? It's kind of a general concept thing here. And I went back through the financials since 2015 or so, something like that. I've been running businesses for 40 years and I've actually never seen this concept of better or worse than budget. It's always either under budget or over budget, because depending on whether you're a revenue or an expense or income or an expense, a positive means a different thing. So it's not really clear until I went and got the detailed financials as to whether you're talking about whether a negative on here is actually always a bad thing or if sometimes it's a good thing. I had to go and get the actual financials from the financial committee and look at those, so then I could understand what you're talking about here. But just in general, and I know it's probably not something that you implemented, but the association's been doing it for a long time. It's actually kind of an odd concept to me. Typically over budget or under budget is a more appropriate thing, and you use the same formula calculating it all the way down. So if it's a positive or a negative, it means a different thing whether you're in revenue or in expense.
Yeah, the better and worse thing is, I guess, would be semantics.
It does become semantics, but it's for someone who's used to running businesses and looking at actual financial statements from corporations, it's a little kind of an odd concept.
Any other questions for Joel? Brian?
Yeah, I didn't have a question for Joel, but just have a general comment. Comment directed toward Linda. If you could just let us know when you look that language up, Linda, to let us know what it says about the special assessment and the budgeting and such. That'd be great. Thanks.
Works for me.
All right, any other questions? All right, thank you, Joel. We'll move on to item number 8, which is new business. And the first item 8A under new business is the 2022 AGM minutes. So the AGM minutes are posted to the website under the board's agendas and minutes page. So those are there for community members and the board to review. If anyone has any concerns or corrections with the minutes, they can email bod@suddenvalley.com, and please include our general manager, Jay Jensen, at suddenvalley.com as well. All right. Is there any questions about that or? Okay. Moving on to 8B, which is committees, discussion and some appointments. So I just kind of wanted to start out by discussing committees kind of in a general concept. So in your board binder, there is the bylaws, which are also on the website, and the bylaws kind of outline committees and there's a whole section on them. We have standing committees and we have ad hoc committees. And basically our standing committees that the board appoints are going to be your finance committee, your document review committee, your long range planning committee, and yeah, and then you have your 2 elected committees that if there's not enough elected people, the board will actually end up appointing members, which we'll do later, of NNE and ACC. And then the board has the ability to create ad hoc committees to do work that may come up that is easier and best done by a smaller group of people to then bring back to the board. So that's typically your ad hoc committees. We've had communications committee, and they do a lot of work with submitting things to the views and trying to push different things to social media and stuff. Other pages besides the associations, various things like that. Those committees should have specifically defined roles and jobs and or deliverables to bring back to the board. You know, it kind of just depends on what those ad hoc committees are doing. And so what we'll do under appointments is we have some NNE and some ACC committee members to approve tonight. And then what I would like to do is try to appoint committee member or board members to committees of our standing committees tonight. And then if we want to have a general conversation about ad hoc committees and forming things and what those need. Sorry, I haven't had a chance to get with the board, had a bunch of illness going on. So, I did meet with Joanne and we've had some conversations about kind of just the timing and strategy of things moving forward. And we think it would be good to, at our January meeting, spend some time reviewing the strategic planning process and documents. And some of those are included in your board binder. And I think that's an important conversation. It's important to review that stuff, you know, before we decide which committees we want to create for the year. We also need to spend some time putting together those exact roles or responsibilities or deliverables that we would need committees to accomplish for us. And so I think it would be prudent to give the board a chance to review that stuff at our first January meeting, and then have a good thorough discussion at that meeting on ad hoc committees. And we can, you know, in the meantime, people can review the documents here, familiarize yourself with the bylaws and how those committees are created. We usually write a charter that outlines the roles and responsibilities and the purpose of the committee and those things. You know, and there's committees we've had historically in the past. We had a community member speak about emergency preparedness committee, you know, parks and trails. There's been lots of other committees created over the years to do specific tasks. So yeah, I don't really have a whole lot to belabor on that. Does anybody have any questions generally about committees?
Yes.
And then we can do the NNE and ACC appointments and then go through the standing committee, appoint chairs and a second board director to those standing committees, except for the treasurer is the chair of the finance committee.
AJ, I have a
and then-
question.
Yeah, okay.
You asked and then kept going, so I'm sorry if I interrupted.
Go ahead.
On NNE, I don't see where the board approves the NNE members that the committee selects. They don't? Okay, then I misunderstood you.
You're just supposed to announce them.
Okay. That's,
But, can I don't know these rules.
ACC, it's clear
Yeah.
about the board has to approve it, but for NNE, no.
Yeah, I looked up the references. It's Article 5, Section 3, Item G. The NNE committee has the ability to appoint members without referral to the board.
Would that also include the ACC?
No.
No, all the committees are different.
What's that?
They're all different. That was one of the issues that we have, which is why it's so confusing. Each of the committees have different requirements. They were written kind of at different times. And some of them aren't really functional the way they're written, which is what causes it. But yeah, the way it's currently written, the NNE appoints, but he just needs to make the announcement of who they've chosen. But with you, you actually have to put them in front of the board, and then the board does the appointment. Sorry.
Sorry, I misunderstood.
No,
what
no
you
worries.
said.
I'd always just kind of treated them the same and just kind of followed the same process for both. So, yeah. Is there any kind of questions about general committees stuff? I know Linda, you had sent an email, so.
Yeah, never got an answer for it either. There are a lot of people in the community that are interested in seeing some of these ad hoc committees being developed. Again, there's a gentleman that came and spoke tonight about EPC, and I know Parks and Trails too would like to be able to get volunteers and get people involved again in the community, which is, you talk about our bylaws, the covenants say that that's what we're supposed to be doing, is offering recreational activities and things for people to participate in. So I hope that when January rolls around, we take a look at all that. Because right now, there's a lot of people want to do stuff, but they're kind of just sitting and twiddling their thumbs, waiting for a decision from us.
Yeah.
Just wanted to hear what you're saying, but I do want to, I think we need to clarify, and that's something we can talk about more in January. But these committees are committees that are formed at the pleasure of the board to assist the board in doing our business. They aren't for entertainment of community members. So community members can create clubs and do other things, but these are very specific committees. And that's why AJ was suggesting that everyone take the time. We need to look at, our strategy for this next year, what we need to be doing in the planning and process, and what assistance the board actually really is looking for this next year. Because these take board directors' time. We have commitment to this, to the association as board directors, but we also end up with these committees. Like if someone volunteers, like EPC hasn't existed for 2.5 years. And so when someone volunteers for that, and then they just don't call meetings or show up, usually what happens is another director then has to take that on, and then, we already have commitments, et cetera. But so that's number one issue, is that we need to be sure that whoever's running those committees are committed to them. That's number one. And secondly, that, but the other thing is that, is it actually needed? Because they've kind of existed, and that's why I think a lot of members get really frustrated, especially with Parks and Trails, because they weren't operating under any guidance of the board. And so what they were doing versus what the budgeting and planning process needed, they didn't line up. And then you had a very frustrated group of people because they spent a lot of time, they worked really hard in these plans, but then it was a disconnect between the actual capital planning. So that's what we want to do, is make sure we bring those things together, right? So that everybody's happy and in it. But that doesn't mean that even if the board determines, oh, we don't necessarily need a particular type of committee, if it's something that people want to create a committee, right, then that's certainly something that they could do, but it just wouldn't be something that would be
Ad hoc of the board.
exactly.
Michael?
I would like to just toss out the thought about the importance of communication, a communication committee, especially in light of all the misinformation that goes out on Facebook. It confused our last election horribly. And so to me, that's a committee that we really need. And really, I agree, we need people that are vested and really invested in doing that. But it's a very important thing so that it offsets all the rumor and innuendos, and there's a direct place that the board and the other committees can, especially during the AGM or SGM if we have one, and address those things clear and concisely so that there's no confusion.
Any other discussion? Nancy?
Michael, if you can find a way to regulate Facebook, you need to patent it.
Well, yeah. I just removed myself from it.
But yeah, I think, there's a lot of things to consider about, committees and stuff. If you look through this documentation at the Articles of Incorporation, next year's our 50th anniversary as the Sun Valley Community Association. So maybe a committee to plan a special one-off event for that would be something that would be a good idea, things like that. So as for the ad hoc committees, I'd encourage people to review this stuff. We'll go over like our strategic planning and the stuff that was put together over the last couple of years at the next meeting in January. And then we can, with that, in conjunction with that, we can discuss, more in depthly the ad hoc committees. I'd suggest, if you see needs and stuff, you can write down specific tasks or roles, deliverables. We could share like an example charter that's been crafted before so people can see kind of what is put into those to like form the committee. Everything like that. So does anybody have any concerns with that approach?
Well, I just want to reiterate the concern that, that a committee like a Parks and Trails can go off the rails and perhaps, oh, that rhymed, and perhaps direct staff to do certain things, right, that aren't governed or aren't on our actual trail plan, such as create a trail behind our house and on a really steep grade, that you probably wouldn't create that trail unless you marked it as an advanced trail, right? That one shouldn't really walk on a normal basis. I love it personally, but no one knew about it. No one directed it. My guess is that perhaps somebody in Parks and Trails said something to a maintenance person and they're like, oh yeah, let's build a trail, so we can't have that anymore in Sun Valley, right? So that's the concern, but we'll see.
Any other discussion on committees before we do appointments? All right, well, let's start with, I'll pass over to Michael. If you want to just give us the names of your NNE members that you guys will be bringing on board. Apparently, we do not have to appoint them.
We had 4 applicants. And one of the applicants was very interested, seemed like a very good applicant, but due to health concerns or fears, she chose, we couldn't do Zoom. And in January, we didn't want to meet outside. So she decided to withdraw her application. And so we appointed Rob Gibbs, Karen Borchardt, and Lori Robinson to fill our 3 positions.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you to those individuals. And I'll pass over to Keith if you want to give us your individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We had 4 applicants this year, 3. One of them we decided, Daniel and I had a meeting, and he's a part-time California and Sudden Valley resident. So he's 6 months here. I assume in 6 months here and 6 months in California, probably 8 there, 4 here. But we decided this time to hold off on asking him to be appointed to the committee because we didn't want to jeopardize the quorum issues, which we already, we're having issues with that, meeting our quorum. So with that, we want to bring back Joe Jean Coase. We'd like Joe Jean, Richard Hart, and Wayne Lee. And all 3 of them have been vetted and in good standing at this time.
Any objections to those individuals?
I wasn't objecting. I know that he had a question. There were some questions that came up, and I'm just wondering if we should clarify why those, those points of clarity or why it was delayed and everything. Because I know Joanne was going to speak to that. If you want to do that before we.
Sure. So the bylaws, of course, define who can serve on the ACC. That is covered in Article 5, Section 2. There's a little bit of confusion about who's eligible to serve because of unclear language. In Article 5, Section 2, subsection A.2, it says that no member of the committee shall serve more than 2 consecutive terms, regardless of whether they are elected or appointed to those terms. After the expiration of 1 year, the member shall again be eligible for election or appointment to the committee. And then in Article 5, Section 2A5, it says, if an ACC member or members for any reason steps down prior to the end of their defined term, the ACC chair shall request the N&E committee to submit not less than 1 nominee, etc. Then the remaining ACC members shall, by majority vote, select the required successors from the nominees. The ACC chair will submit nominees to the board for approval, will then serve until the conclusion of the next AGM. So their term is less than a year. But in the first thing, it says they can't serve more than 2 consecutive terms. So what is a term, right? Or
3
6 years.
3 years and the maximum of 6.
Yeah,
Well,
2 consecutive terms, or a maximum of 6 successive years.
So then there was the issue of Rich Hart because he was elected in 2016. And then he went off in November of 2020. Rich was, and he went off right in November 2020. But we brought him back in like August of 2021. And so he actually didn't technically set off the full year. And so we just needed to be assured that, that there wasn't going to be an issue that we were violating the bylaws as they were written. And again, they aren't very clear because you are dealing with contractors and everything. And if you guys made a decision and then they said you weren't duly constituted or you're not properly formed, then your decisions would be invalid. And so that's why, we had to take the extra precaution. But
yeah, so it boils down to the language doesn't specifically define what the term is of an appointed member, but the ACC has a working principle that appointed members may serve for 2 successive years and then must take a break of 1 year before returning for additional terms. And this seems reasonable given the language that's there. The 3 candidates put forward by Keith do satisfy the requirement, except for that confusion around the gentleman who left in mid-year. So the decision or the advice given by the lawyer was that since there are open spots and the working principle is potentially satisfied that the candidates should not be barred from being appointed if the board made that decision.
All right. Any objections to, was Joe Jean Coase?
Richard Hart and Wayne Lee.
All right, hearing none, those are appointed.
Just say one more thing, sorry. I would like to really, part of NNE is also nominations and elections, right? So nominating, like trying to assist Keith in finding these additional members would be really, really helpful, because even though we skirted the little issue with the way the bylaws are written, and obviously we're going to have to figure that out and clarify that, you know, this year, but we're going to run into a problem come November if all he has to put forward is these same people. And Ashley, your term expires, so you'll have to decide whether or not you're running again. So it's going to be real important that we get people on that committee early. So maybe you guys can help with that.
So there are now 4 people on ACC?
Correct.
4, so you have 5 openings.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
You have 5.
We have 4 openings currently. We have 5 on the ACC. Yeah, excuse me. So myself, Daniel, he's also elected, newly elected at the last AGM, and then Joe Jean, Rich, and Wayne.
But there
So
are
5 of us right now on the committee, and there's 4 openings.
Okay, so NNE should make a notice that those openings are available.
Yeah, you know, and you guys, you can write an article for the
Okay.
reviews and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I'll get with you. We'll do pictures and everything.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, this is obviously not a conversation for tonight, but, you know, there is some obscurity in the bylaws there and some of the committee stuff. And, you know, the board may also want to consider not having a 9-member ACC committee, since we struggle to fill that, and reducing that down to like 7 or 5 or something might be more practical. All right, so then the appointments that we have remaining for the standing committee for the boards, we have Finance Committee, Document Review Committee, and Long Range Planning Committee. So the second board member spot, Finance Committee, we can do first. We'll just kind of do this the same way we did the organizational meeting. I'll take nominations from the floor for that, and then we'll have a vote on that. Are there any nominations for the second member on finance?
I'll nominate my neighbors too. Sorry about that if you didn't want it, but I didn't ask and I should have. It would have been polite.
Quite all right.
Accept the nomination.
I'll accept the nomination.
Or any other nominations? All right, hearing none, we'll have Stu as the second board member on the finance committee. Thank you, Stu. And then moving on to document review committee. First, we'll appoint a chair, and then we'll do the second board member after that.
I'd like to nominate Nancy Alyanak as chair.
Nancy's been nominated. Are there any other nominations?
I accept.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
I'd like to nominate Linda Bradley on document review.
Okay.
Well, this is for the chair. This is for the chair position.
Oh, I'm sorry. I withdraw that.
Well, I was going to say, if you don't mind, so document review is generally a committee of the board. And so it's like, we can't have a quorum, but you know, it's like 3 members is better if it's 3, not 4, so that we don't split the vote, right? Or that's what we did. So, but 3 directors. So you have the chair, and then there'll be a potential for 2 other people, 2 other seats on there. I just thought I'd add that real quick.
All right, any other nominations for the chair position? All right, we'll have Nancy as the chair of document review. Do I have any nominations for a second board director for document review?
I changed my mind. No, I'm just kidding. I nominate Linda Bradley.
I nominate Sonia. Or either second or third or second or whatever.
And are you,
Yeah, sure.
did you accept the nomination?
We need to do better with our minutes, though, that's for sure.
Any other nominations? All right, so we'll have Sonia and Linda appointed as board directors with Nancy as the chair. All right, and the long range planning committee, we will take nominations for the chair.
I would like to nominate President Andrew Tischlitter as chair of long range planning.
I'll accept any other nominations. All right, hearing none, I'll be the chair of long range planning, and we'll appoint a second board director to long range planning. Do I have any nominations for that position?
I nominate Sam Shahan.
Any other nominations? All right, here none, we'll move forward with myself as the chair and Sam as the second board director on long range planning. I believe that's all the appointments at this time, and start to get some charters developed and do some appointments for ad hoc committees and stuff. January.
Can I make a point? We've asked the membership to volunteer for committees. And if you go on the Sudden Valley website, you can apply for finance, DRC, Parks and Trails is on there, but you have to, when you open it up, it's like buried under there, but there's nobody for these people to contact if they volunteer for that committee.
Those committees don't exist. They actually shouldn't be on the.
That's why I'm saying it was real confusing. I went and looked because I was like, I didn't understand, what was going on, but it's like there's some ad hocs there that have no chairs or charters or anything yet that are there. But when you go down, which one do you want to be on? Parks and Trails isn't on the main page, but when you ask to volunteer, it's there then. I don't know if that's just something that needs to be fixed.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff on the website that I can't fix because I'm not an expert in WordPress.
It's okay. It's something that's just strange when you start talking about committees.
And
that's all.
no, I understand and I apologize, but there are so many hundreds of pages of content on the site that it's quite daunting to try and find all of the references to everything else without some tool. Other platforms are easier to manage, but WordPress isn't the best for a site of our scope.
I just wanted to mention that.
Maybe
We're asking for volunteers.
Maybe we need to consider having two separate forms, one for volunteering for standing committees that we just kind of have always available, and then one for ad hoc committees where we can post.
Absolutely. Yes,
As they needed.
each year when they're developed. Yep. Good plan.
So you could probably just add text, Joanne, like in the announcement or something, and just go, contact whatever admin, I don't know, at Sudden Valley. If you want to volunteer, that might be the better way to do it.
We'll look into that. Any other questions or concerns about committees? We'll keep this conversation going next month. Okay, any over here? All right, we will move on to last item in our new business. That's 8C tree removal report and a request for additional funding. So I'll pass that over to Joanne.
Yes, I am presenting this request on behalf of Mike Brock, our maintenance superintendent. Purpose of this capital request is to request additional funding for the removal of SVCA's hazardous trees. We had to undertake a significant amount of unforeseen hazardous tree removals in Sudden Valley due to 2022 weather events and a lack of previous hazard tree removal and maintenance. As of December 13th, the operations budget GL number 6165 line item has paid out $133,291 for hazardous tree services, which exceeds the 2022 total annual budget of $60,000 by a total of $73,291. Additionally, another $60,000 has been approved and spent out of UDR project code 9622.2, which was approved 5/12/2022, which brings total 2022 spending on hazardous trees to $193,291. The proposal at hand is to provide additional UDR funding for the 2022 cost of the removal of SVCA hazardous trees. The request is for additional funding of $74,000 out of UDR for hazardous tree removal to supplement the unforeseen overrun of the operations GL item 6165.
All right. Well, I'll put the motion on the table first. The motion is that the board of directors approve the proposal for increased UDR funding in the amount of $74,000 for 2022 hazardous tree services. Is there any? We don't need seconds anymore, so that's a very strange thing to me. I'm gonna have to get used to that in my head. Is there any discussion on that, Stu?
Just a little clarification here. So it's indicating that 193,000 has already been spent on hazardous tree removal. So I did not notice in the budget where that additional funding came from over the 60,000 that was already approved. So is that in the budget? Can you point us to that, Joel?
So ACC department, and you just went to ACC GL. You'll see 60,000, and of course, as of December 13th, total expenditures for this GL was the 133,000. So since the budget was 60,000, that means that's line item currently over budget by 73,000.
Okay, so it is in,
Oh, yeah.
in addition to the 193 is another 74,000.
The 193, 291. That's just saying, it's a combination of the 60,000 that was authorized and spent out of DDR plus the 133,000. So it's basically just ignoring what's the.
Okay, but it is saying that you need an additional 74,000 for hazardous tree removal.
So what it is it's being, because these were emergency trees, that they were authorized by Joanne to take down, like, recently, like some went over roads and things like that. So these are emergencies and they've come out of ops. And so it's a housekeeping matter really to then now reimburse operations.
Okay, that answers my question, yeah.
Yeah, and so we budgeted 60,000. And then I forgot in May, I guess we came back to the board and asked for an additional 60,000 because we had already spent that so quickly.
That was out of UDR too, not the
Yeah,
ops
and
budget.
that's the
So you'll see
second.
that on the capital project sheet. There'll be under the UDR one, there'll be a hazard tree.
Where's that?
It's in Joel's financial reports, second last page, but the front of it, of the board packet. You'll see there is two, but the hazardous tree removal UDR 2020, there is a small amount.
So the one that you'll see on those open, the one where you see the green dots and the red dots, that is, that's from 2019. And when that was put forward, there were some very specific trees that were listed on that allocation. We've actually taken care of all of those trees that were listed now. And so Joel will be closing that out. And so that it won't be open anymore. But we won't be using that 8,000 on these trees because that was designated for some specific trees. It had a tree list. And there is a list of the trees that were taken down. And Joanne can email that, I guess, to everybody. Because like I said, this work, or Joel said, or somebody, Joanne, this work has already been done. It's been done, it's been paid for. We're just trying to allocate the funds appropriately.
I saw Linda, then Michael.
I just wanted to mention that 2 weeks ago, 3 of us were leaving the library and there was a very nice tree came down across the road, and had those other trees not been there, there probably would have been loss of life right there. And you don't have a box for that in your budget. And so it was pretty exciting and scary. I mean, I was the 3rd car back, saw the whole thing happen. And so what we do with the trees around here is extremely important. And so I would like to encourage the board to allocate the money for that.
Linda?
I just wanted to say, I thought in May, there was a whole list that compiled that 60,000. And I thought we were going to print it, but I don't remember, because at that time I was just a member. I think we asked for that to be put out for everybody, but I don't know that it ever was. And it would be nice to get a list so that I know they're hazard trees and they come up in a hurry and people want them taken down, but it's like, it would be nice to have an accounting of how much is this costing us for individual trees and stuff. Cause I know sometimes you can take down 6 and it'll maybe cost you $10,000. You can take down another 6 and it'll cost you $80,000. So I think it's really important that we really keep an accurate record that's there, because we're going to be spending another, isn't it 75,000 in starting in January, you're going to have extra money.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Joanne can probably work to put together that for us. Sam?
Yeah, I agree about funding the trees, and I've personally been out on some sites where the trees were being removed and certain situations where it was some emergencies. And so each one's different. Sometimes you could get in there easily and lay them down. Other times they got to call climbers and carefully drop them in small pieces. So I understand all that. I just like to bring that up to the membership. So for some of those costs could be large. The next thing I would like to know, as I'm looking at this, as far as how did we calculate the 74,000? Is there some baseline that, or I mean, it's so hard to figure out each tree, but I was just kind of curious and see how we came up with that number.
Talking in the budget, this next year's budget, or this in the request?
The request
That's-
adding 74.
That's based off of invoices that are already paid out of ops.
So this is
We're
just
basically
to pay.
refunding operations with capital money,
Thank you.
or well, UDR is kind of a weird.
Yeah, it's confusing because
op.
if there were trees that were sort of marginal, or we wanted to be proactive about trees, we would bring that to the board for approval before taking action. But when a tree is in danger of crushing someone's house and it's evaluated and determined to be a significant risk, I approve that so that we don't crush somebody's house and avoid any loss of life or significant liability.
Good call.
And
So-
most of these are
Yeah.
require climbing, as Sam said. Most of them are right next to people's homes, things like that on Sun Valley's property.
Yeah, and Linda is exactly right. Some of them are $300 and some of them are 6,000.
Just there's such a wide variety of
Have some cushion
size
or
and
something.
situation and where is the house and are there power lines? So, but yeah, this is money that we've already spent because they were threatening a home or a person.
Question after.
Go ahead, Keith.
The only question I had is, I know like this year, it's close to 200,000, right, on hazard tree removal. Is it possible to look at some overall inclusive company that might come out and just start clearing trees out? You know, if we're gonna spend $200,000 a year, I don't know. I'm just thinking, is there some contract or some big company that might come in and be able to help thin things out, get rid of the hazards before they come hazards? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think we would want our staff to probably dive in and look at something like that and give us some sort of recommendation on how we would proceed with that, I would think.
I don't know if it had any cost savings or not, but
Yeah. So,
Sorry. I was just going to say, when we, that's that second round, when we were doing that request that Linda's talking about, the way that we got that list is, so we utilize RAWs in these emergency situations because they're responsive. They'll come out generally within an hour, and they do have climbers and all of the equipment. We know that they have all of their insurance. That's been an issue, obviously, with some of these tree companies too. And so on this situation, they've become very reliable in emergencies. We know that they will get out there, even if, it's windy, et cetera, dangerous, like those trees that, Mike was talking about. It was really precarious. That tree was hanging over the road and through other trees. And so that was a 2-day job. It was pretty crazy. And but what they did is that they actually drove all of our streets and looked at all the trees. The problem is you can't see all the trees and you can't tell, like some trees look perfectly fine. And then, they fall across the road or something like that.
you trim this one and the one next to it falls over.
Right. And so they did evaluate those, and that's how we figured out these are the ones. Like we had $54,000 in trees that we took down that were urgent emergency trees based on that. And then we have a group of trees that need to go out to bid because they're not so urgent. And so we're just waiting to put those out first quarter, and then, because then we're able to allow people to bid. But it's the emergency things where it's like, this is happening right now, utilizing it. But AJ can probably speak to it a little more. He's talked about doing an on-call contract with a tree company for the emergency services, and so that's something that the board will probably discuss at a future date. But they did evaluate. I just wanted you to know that. And then, and I'm sorry, I'm going to real quickly tell you. So you already know this, but if somebody does call and they feel like there's a hazard tree that's going to fall or whatever on their home, if it's going to hurt like property, their home or our infrastructure, right? Or there's a possibility of, a safety issue. We immediately will send maintenance out, and he's trained to go out and take a look at these trees. And then if he feels like that, we may need to have it cut, he'll call the arborist in to come out and evaluate as well. And so there is a strategy for always looking at those trees and trying to keep an eye on them anyway.
Sam?
Sorry.
I agree, Keith. Maintenance and preservation of our forest would be beneficial, because some of these trees that when they do go down, they destabilize other trees, do root damage. They're all tied together. And I agree, at some point we should be looking at a little more proactive tree removal to help the health of the other trees. And so, but it's a big project. I mean, that's like logging in Sudden Valley. So it's worthy of discussion. We could save something and possibly help all of our trees. Thank you.
Any other discussion? All right, hearing none, we'll call the question. The motion on the table is for the board of directors to approve the proposal for increased UDR funding in the amount of $74,000 for 2022 hazard tree services. All those in favor? All right, that passes unanimously. All right, and we are adjourned. So that's the end of the meeting. Thank you, everyone.
No motion?
No, you just say, our business for the evening is